Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had two horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It also causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell.
Bible scholars are finally admitting what they've hidden for years. Revelation doesn't add up. In the Gospels, Jesus refuses to hurt anyone. In Revelation, he's a warrior dripping with blood. In Genesis, God makes two heavens. In Revelation, only one passes away. Was it written before or after Jerusalem fell in 70 CE? Nobody knows for sure. And why would God make his biggest revelation so confusing that Christians have fought over its meaning for 2,000 years? These aren't small mistakes. They're huge problems that experts don't want you to know about. The book of Revelation has confused and fascinated people for nearly 2,000 years. Its strange symbols and dramatic visions have led to 4 very different ways of understanding what it means. Each approach tells a different story. Each one has followers who believe their way is right. And the truth is, none of them fully agree with each other. Sometimes they don't even agree within their own group. But these 4 views continue to shape how people read one of the most mysterious books in the Bible. One of the oldest ways to read Revelation is called the historicist approach. This view sees the book as a timeline that starts with Jesus' first coming and stretches all the way to his second coming. It was especially popular during the Protestant Reformation. Reformers like Martin Luther, John Calvin, and Jan Hus believed Revelation described real events from church history. To them, the visions were like a map of what would happen to Christians over the centuries. Historicists looked at the symbols and connected them to specific people and events. They believed the harlot Babylon in chapter 17 stood for the Roman Catholic Church and the papacy. The beast from the sea in chapter 13 was seen as a symbol of Islam. They also believed there were 7 major periods of church history shown through different images in the book. One writer named Edward Bishop Elliot linked the trumpet judgments in Revelation 8 and 9 to major attacks on the Roman Empire. He said the events stretched from AD 395 with the Gothic invasions to AD 1453 when the Eastern Roman Empire fell to the Turks. This approach had strengths. It showed that Revelation might speak to more than just the end times. It saw meaning across church history, but it also had big problems. Historicists believed the visions followed a simple order from start to finish. Many modern readers think that's too rigid, and none of their predictions about the return of Jesus ever came true. That's why this view has lost support over time. The next major view is called the preterist approach. The word comes from Latin and means past. Preterists believe most of Revelation already happened in the 1st century. They say the book was written before Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed in AD 70. So the visions are not about the end of the world. They are about events that were happening during John's time. Preterists believe Revelation is full of symbols that point to the Roman Empire and its emperors. In chapter 17, John talks about 7 kings. Preterists say these were real Roman rulers. The line "one is" refers to Emperor Nero. The next one, who has not yet come, refers to Galba. They also point to Revelation 11, where John is told to measure the temple. If the temple was still standing, then the book must have been written before AD 70, when it was destroyed. This view has both full and partial versions. Full preterists say all the prophecies in Revelation were fulfilled in the 1st century. Partial preterists believe most were, but some, like the final return of Jesus, are still in the future. Well-known preterists include R.C. Sproul, Hank Hanegraaff, Kenneth Gentry, and David Chilton. This approach makes Revelation easier to understand for modern readers, but it also raises questions about how much of the book still matters today. Then there's the futurist approach. This view says most of Revelation is about events that haven't happened yet. According to this view, chapters 4 to 22 describe the future. It includes the rise of the Antichrist, a global crisis, and the second coming of Christ. Many futurists believe the rapture of the church happens at the start of chapter 4. After that comes a 7-year period of trouble, followed by Jesus' return. Futurists take a more literal approach. They believe the book's images point to real future events. For example, in Revelation 19:20, the beast and false prophet are not just symbols. They are actual people who will be judged by God. This view became very popular in the 20th century thanks to the Left Behind books and the rise of dispensationalism. It also divides Revelation into 3 parts using Revelation 1:19. Chapter 1 is the past. Chapters 2 and 3 are about the present churches. Chapters 4 to 22 are the future. Critics say futurists are too focused on literal details. Some warn about newspaper theology, trying to match Bible verses to today's headlines. But defenders say they do see symbols. They just believe those symbols point to real events that will happen in the end times. The fourth major view is called the idealist approach. Some call it the symbolic approach. Idealists believe Revelation is not about specific events in the past or future. Instead, it's a picture of the ongoing battle between good and evil. The symbols in the book are not about real people or real places. They are about spiritual truths that apply in every age. In this view, the dragon is a symbol of Satan. The beast is any corrupt power. The lamb is Jesus. The millennium is not a future time, but a symbol of the church age. Idealists believe the book is not a prophecy map. It's a message of hope for believers who are suffering. It shows that God is in control, even when the world looks like it's falling apart. This way of reading Revelation goes back to early Christian thinkers and became popular during the Middle Ages. It's more poetic and less focused on history. Some readers love this view because it speaks to every generation. Others think it's too vague and avoids clear meaning. Moreover, the book of Revelation stands out from the rest of the New Testament. It doesn't show Jesus as the gentle teacher or forgiving Savior we see in the Gospels. Instead, it paints a fierce and frightening picture of divine judgment. In Revelation, both God and the Lamb, who is clearly identified as Jesus, carry out catastrophic punishments. There are plagues, fire, darkness, and suffering for those who align with evil. The tone is urgent, the images are violent, and the message is clear. Judgment is coming. In chapter 16, 7 angels pour out bowls filled with God's wrath. One bowl brings painful sores. Another scorches people with intense heat. Another plunges the kingdom of the beast into darkness. These are not symbolic warnings. They are direct acts of divine punishment against those who worship evil and reject God. In chapter 14, the image becomes even more vivid. The unrepentant are described as grapes crushed in a winepress. Blood flows from the press so high it reaches the bridles of horses. It is a brutal picture. Later in chapter 20, the beast and the false prophet are thrown into a lake of fire. Those whose names are not written in the Lamb's Book of Life follow them. This fire is not temporary. The torment lasts forever. The book also speaks of the wrath of the Lamb in chapter 6. People beg the mountains to fall on them just to escape it. It's a strange phrase. The Lamb is usually a symbol of gentleness. But here, Jesus is the avenger. He is the one bringing terror and judgment. This stands in sharp contrast to how Jesus acts in the Gospels. In Matthew 5, he tells people to love their enemies and pray for those who persecute them. In John 8, he refuses to condemn a woman caught in adultery. And after rising from the dead, instead of blaming the disciples for abandoning him, he breathes peace on them. This is the Jesus most people know, the Jesus who forgives and heals, the Jesus who refuses violence. So how do we make sense of this difference? One reason comes from the style of the writing. Revelation is apocalyptic literature. It uses symbols, visions, and coded images to speak about real events and deep truths. The beasts, dragons, and plagues are part of that. They're not just for effect. They reflect the suffering and fear that early Christians were living through. Around the year 90 to 95 CE, Christians were facing pressure from the Roman Empire. Revelation was written to encourage them. To say that even though things look dark now, God will win. Evil will fall. Justice will come. That's also why the imagery is so extreme. The book is not just talking about bad leaders, it's targeting whole systems of evil, like Babylon, which represents violent empire and economic greed. And the Lamb, who looks weak at first, turns out to be the one who defeats these powers. In chapter 5, Jesus is called the Lion of Judah, but when he appears, he looks like a slaughtered lamb. It's through sacrifice, not force, that he conquers. That's a key message. Even in the middle of all the destruction, the heart of the victory is love shown through suffering. Some theologians say that God's wrath and God's love are not opposites. They are connected. Wrath is what love looks like when it faces evil. A loving God cannot just ignore injustice. If love means anything, it must also mean fighting against what destroys. In that sense, the judgment in Revelation is not only punishment, it's a way of removing what is evil so something new can begin. That's the promise in chapter 21, where God says, "I am making all things new. There will be no more death, no more mourning, no more pain." But even with these explanations, not everyone is convinced. Some scholars point to what they see as real contradictions. They say the wrath of the Lamb clashes with moments like Luke 9, where Jesus stops his disciples from calling down fire on a Samaritan village, or that the image of eternal torment in Revelation 14, where the smoke of the condemned rises forever, doesn't fit with Jesus' statement in John 12 that he will draw all people to himself. These tensions raise deep questions. If God really wants all people to be saved, as it says in 1 Timothy 2, how does that fit with everlasting punishment? The final chapters of the Bible talk about a new beginning. Revelation 21:1 says, "I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away." At first glance, this sounds clear. But when you compare it with the creation story in Genesis, a problem appears. The timeline doesn't match. And for people who study the Bible closely, this has been a serious puzzle. Let's go back to Genesis. The very first verse says, "In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth." That is Genesis 1:1. So right from the start, we see heaven and earth created together. But just a few verses later in Genesis 1:6-8, something new is made. God creates a firmament. It separates the waters above from the waters below, and he names it heaven. This is now a second thing called heaven. It's not the same as the heaven from verse 1. It's a separate part of creation. In ancient times, people believed this firmament was a solid dome. It stretched over the earth. It held back the waters above. The stars and planets were thought to hang below it. People believed rain came through windows in the dome. They pictured the earth as a flat disk. Water was above and below. Mountains stood at the edges. The dome rested on them. This picture of the universe shaped how the people of the Bible thought and wrote. That's why Genesis describes not just one, but two heavens. One at the beginning, and another created in the six-day process. Now fast forward to Revelation. When John writes that the first heaven passes away, he seems to ignore that Genesis had two. Our current heaven would actually be the second one mentioned in the Bible. So why does John call it the first? One explanation comes from something called dispensational interpretation. This view says that John was counting based on Israel's experience. According to this idea, the heaven created in Genesis 1:1 was part of a very early world. It didn't relate to Israel's history directly. It was more connected to the spiritual creation. So John counts from the six-day creation onward. That makes the firmament heaven the first one in his view, which would explain why Revelation calls it the first. There's another theory too. It says there were actually 3 heavens and 3 earths. In this view, Genesis 1:1 describes the first heaven and earth. That world was later destroyed by water. Some connect this to Noah's flood. Others think it refers to an earlier destruction. After that came the 6-day creation, which made the second heaven and earth. That is the world we live in now. Then Revelation 21 describes the third heaven and earth, a new creation that comes after the final judgment. If you follow this idea, then John in Revelation skips over the original world in Genesis 1:1. He only counts the current one as the first. That's why the wording still makes sense to him, even if it doesn't seem to match the start of Genesis. Both views try to fix the same issue. The wording in Revelation doesn't seem to line up with the 2 heavens in Genesis, but each explanation has a different way of solving it. One uses the lens of Israel's story, the other breaks history into 3 stages. Either way, the problem shows how much depends on how you read the text. Then there is a big question about when was it written? This might seem like a small detail, but the date changes everything. If it was written before the destruction of the Jerusalem temple in 70 CE, then many of its prophecies could be about that event. If it was written after, then the book might be pointing to something else entirely, something in the future, or something more symbolic. Most traditional scholars believe Revelation was written between 90 and 95 CE, during the rule of the Roman Emperor Domitian. This view is mainly based on early Christian writers. Irenaeus, who wrote around 180 CE, said that John received his vision near the end of Domitian's reign. Irenaeus had been taught by Polycarp, who had known John personally. That kind of link gives weight to what he said. Other early sources agree. Clement of Alexandria, who wrote around 200 CE, also connected John's exile to Domitian. So did Victorinus in the late 200s and Eusebius in the 300s. These writers all placed Revelation in the time of Domitian's persecution. But not everyone accepts this. Some believe Revelation was written earlier, between 65 and 68 CE, during the reign of Nero. This view challenges tradition and focuses more on clues found inside the text. Scholars who support the early date say that later Christians may have mixed up Domitian with Nero, since both emperors were known for cruelty and for targeting Christians. One early Christian document, called the Muratorian Fragment, was written between 170 and 200 CE. It says that John wrote Revelation before Paul's letters. Since Paul died around 67 or 68 CE, that would put Revelation earlier than most people think. The text itself offers clues that support this idea. In Revelation chapter 11, the temple is described as still standing, though it's being trampled by Gentiles for 42 months. That matches the Jewish War, which lasted from spring 67 CE to August 70 CE. If the temple had already been destroyed, many believe John would have said so. Another clue is the famous number 666 in Revelation 13:18. That number matches the name of Nero in Hebrew letters. After Nero died in 68 CE, a strange rumor spread that he would come back to life. That legend fits the fear and mystery found in Revelation. There's also a letter in chapter 3 addressed to the church in Laodicea. John describes the city as wealthy, but Laodicea was hit by a strong earthquake in 60 CE and took years to rebuild. Some believe the city couldn't have recovered by 65 or 66 CE. Others argue that by the 90s it would have fully recovered. So the description makes sense either way. Supporters of the late date point to different parts of the book. Revelation speaks strongly against emperor worship, which became more common during Domitian's reign from 81 to 96 CE. Nero's persecution of Christians was brutal, but short-lived and mostly limited to Rome. Domitian's actions were more organized and spread across the empire. The book also uses the word Babylon as a symbol. Most scholars agree that Babylon refers to Rome. The way Revelation describes it sounds more like the powerful and cruel system seen under Domitian than under Nero. The 7 churches mentioned in chapters 2 and 3 also seem well established and organized, which suggests a later stage of Christian development. Why does this all matter? Because the date affects how people read the book. Those who support an early date often follow what's called the preterist view. They believe most of Revelation's prophecies came true during the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE. In this view, Revelation is mostly about something that already happened. Those who believe in a later date tend to see the book as either a prophecy of future events or a symbolic story about good and evil. This fits with both the futurist and idealist views. In both cases, the destruction of the temple is not the main focus. Modern scholars are divided. A recent study showed that 42% support the later Domitianic date. Around 28% support the earlier Neronian date. The rest are unsure or believe the book might have parts from both periods. There are good arguments on both sides. Nero ruled from 54 to 68 CE. His persecution of Christians began in 64 CE and ended with his death. Domitian ruled from 81 to 96 CE. His oppression was more official and wide-reaching. Revelation seems to match either emperor in different ways. The number of the beast also adds confusion. While most manuscripts say 666, a few say 616. Some think this might point to Domitian or to a variation of Nero's name. Either way, it shows that Revelation was using symbols that people at the time would understand. Revelation is apocalyptic writing. That means it uses dramatic language, vivid symbols, and hidden meanings. It's not meant to be a simple history. That's why the book allows for multiple readings. It can reflect real events while also speaking to timeless struggles. The book of Revelation begins with a promise. It says this is a revelation from Jesus Christ. The word revelation comes from the Greek word apocalypsis, which means unveiling or revealing. But the strange part is how it goes about this. Instead of speaking clearly, it uses symbols that are often hard to understand. For 2,000 years, people have read it and come away with very different ideas. The book says it is revealing the truth, yet it wraps that truth in mystery. That's the paradox. John, the writer of Revelation, made a deliberate choice to write this way. In Revelation 1:1, he used the Greek word semeno, which means to show through signs or symbols. He did not use the word norizo, which means to make known directly. This wasn't random. It was on purpose. The same word semeno is used in the Greek version of Daniel 2:45, where Daniel explains King Nebuchadnezzar's dream. That dream was also full of symbols. By using this word, John was telling his readers that this message would not be plain or simple. It would speak through signs. Only a few of the symbols in Revelation are explained. We are told what the 7 stars and the 7 lampstands mean. The 7 lamps of fire are also explained, but most symbols are not. To understand them, readers need knowledge of the Old Testament. They also need some background in Jewish apocalyptic writing and the Roman world of the first century. On top of that, John says he saw things that were hard to describe. These were visions from heaven. He had to use images to describe things that could not be captured in ordinary words. That leads to a serious question. Why would God reveal truth in such a difficult way? In 1 Corinthians 14:33, Paul writes that God is not the author of confusion. So why use symbols that can be misunderstood? Scholars have offered several ideas. One answer is found in the way prophets worked in the Old Testament. When people stopped listening to plain warnings, the prophets changed how they spoke. They used stories, strange actions, and dramatic images. It was a kind of shock treatment. The goal was to wake people up. In the same way, John may have used symbols to reach churches that had become spiritually numb. His images were meant to shake them. Another reason may have been safety. Some believe the book used symbolic language as a kind of code. John wrote during a time when the Roman Empire was harsh toward anything that seemed rebellious. If Revelation had spoken too directly, it might have put believers in danger. By hiding the message in symbols, John could deliver it safely. It was clear enough for those who had eyes to see, but hidden from those who might attack them. One view even says the message had to pass through the hands of corrupt editors. Symbols helped it survive that process. There's also a deeper reason. Some truths are too big for simple words. Heaven, evil, judgment, and the end of the world cannot always be described in plain sentences. That's why prophets, and even Jesus, used images. Symbols invite people to feel and reflect. They go beyond facts. They create a deeper kind of understanding. Another explanation is that the book was meant to be hard, not to frustrate the reader, but to make them dig. As one scholar put it, the treasure is there, but it's buried. If you don't work to understand it, you won't find it. The difficulty is part of the design. The book asks for effort and attention. The book of Revelation is one of the most mysterious and debated parts of the Bible. What makes it so hard to understand is that it speaks about real events from the past, but also describes things that seem to belong to the future. This mix of history and prophecy has confused readers for centuries. Some parts clearly talk about what was happening in the Roman Empire during the first century. Other parts describe events that go far beyond anything that has ever happened on earth. When Revelation begins, it is written as a letter to 7 churches in Asia Minor. These were real Christian communities living under Roman rule. They were facing serious threats during the time of John, the author. Around 64 CE, a fire broke out in Rome. Emperor Nero blamed the Christians. That started a wave of violent persecution. Christians were arrested, tortured, and even killed. This was the first time they became a direct target of the Roman state. By the time John wrote Revelation, probably in the 90s CE, things were getting worse. He had been exiled to the island of Patmos. That likely happened under Emperor Domitian, who ruled from 81 to 96 CE. Domitian continued the harsh treatment that Nero had started. So when John talks about beasts and evil rulers, his readers would have understood. In Revelation 17, he describes a woman called Babylon, who rides a beast. To the people of that time, Babylon was clearly a symbol for Rome. It represented the empire's power and violence. In chapters 13 and 17, John gives more clues. The beast is linked to the number of emperors and also to persecution. Some scholars believe this points directly to Nero. Even though Nero died in 68 CE, many believed he would return. His name became a symbol of fear. For Christians, he was the image of evil and cruelty. But not everything in Revelation is about the Roman Empire. Some parts seem to go far beyond that time and place. In chapter 21, John describes a new heaven and a new earth. The old world disappears. A new reality begins. That kind of change has never happened in human history. It sounds like something that belongs to the very end of time. In chapters 20 to 22, John describes events that are even more dramatic. Satan is thrown into a prison called the Abyss for 1,000 years. After that, there is a final judgment. Every person who ever lived is raised and judged. These scenes describe something global. In some visions, a third of the earth, a third of the sea, and a third of the sky are affected. That level of destruction is not about Rome. It is about the whole world. Because of this, many scholars believe that most of Revelation is still about the future. Some say that everything after chapter 3 has not yet happened. They see the visions as warnings about what is to come. This includes the rise of a final evil leader, the return of Christ, and the last battle between good and evil.